Good morning, everyone. You don't need to unmute your microphone just to answer that. It's okay. I heard your good mornings. So there are three, aspects I would like to discuss about today. We know, most of the people who have joined today are already photographers. They know their camera. They know how to do exposure, set exposure. How to focus and all those things. There's nothing new to be discussed in such a short time. But there are certain things which has to be considered very carefully when you do any field photography, say particularly aspects like exposure compensation, when to compensate, how to decide when to compensate, and to what extent we should compensate our exposures. And second, we'll be discussing about composition, and we'll be discussing something about equipments. When you talk about exposure compensation, and if you take your camera in your hand, you will see a plus minus button somewhere, right? uh, where behind the shutter release button in most of the cases. So behind the shutter release button, you will see a plus minus button. So this plus minus button allows you to compensate your exposure, or the exposure that camera thinks as correct, and that button allows you to override that, uh, override what camera thinks as the correct exposure. Now, there's, if you see through the viewfinder, or if you switch on your LCD, the back LCD, you will see a scale like you know uh, this plus minus thing. So towards plus, if you move that cursor, that means you will positively compensate. Towards minus, if you move that cursor by turning the wheel, uh, it will negatively compensate the exposures. This is positive negative exposure compensation. In case of Nikon or Canon, the orientation of the plus or minus may be different. Like normally, like in Nikon, the plus is towards the left, minus is towards the right. In case of Canon, the plus is towards the right, minus is towards the left when you see through the viewfinder. And accordingly, you can compensate like one stop, two stop, or even fraction of one stop. Normally the maximum fraction would be like 1/3 of its, so 1/3 of a stop, so 0.3, 0.6, 1, something like that. So this is a very useful feature. Why? Now, say consider this image. Now the EV0, I mean, of course, I have digitally created this just to give you an idea of why exposure compensation is important. Now, if you look at EV0, that's the image of this bird flying over the water, and it looks pretty much dull because there was a lot of black areas in the picture, and there was a lot of extremely bright areas in the picture. Now, what I need to show, I know where I need my details, whether I need my details on the background, whether I need the details on the subject, or whether I need the details on that trail of water that the bird's wing is creating. So in order to do that, my only weapon would be to, you know, get the exposure correct. Now, if I let the camera decide the exposure, it will do something like this EV0, that is, exposure is not compensated to what camera has thought. Now, if I do EV -1, it corrects the, image a bit, like, there are some bit of, darkening of the background. But if I really want to bring out the bird, or particularly the you can say the rim light on the bird, where there's a bright lining on the wings, and like I need my details here, and I need my detail on the bird. So if I correct, if I compensate the exposure by -2 stop, this is probably the best compensation that I can give in order to bring the details on the areas that I need. I don't want details here. I don't want details here. I need the details here. I need the details here. So by compensating the exposure by -2, I can get the detail. Uh, Now, why the camera does this? Why the camera doesn't do this or this by itself? And that is because there is a concept called 18% gray. Okay, it's been applicable since the film photography days. Actually, it's nothing new to digital photography. 18% gray is considered as it's a kind of middle point between black and white. Now I'll go into details of this. So whenever camera sees the total amount of light in the frame, like for example, there is a brighter area, there is a darker area, it will average it out to make the entire frame 18% gray. Now, can anyone tell me which of these circles are 18% gray? Now, this is tricky because we don't feel like if it is middle of black and white, it should be 50%, isn't it? Our conventional mathematical knowledge tells us that the middle point should be 50% of black and white. But in terms of photography, it is not. It is more about actually the visual perception. Okay, what we call as middle gray is more of a visual perception than the actual mathematical average. And this 18% figure has been determined with between the black and white on an exponential curve. Now, I don't want to go into too much of mathematics. So it is not a linear curve, but it's an exponential curve. Now, if it is exponential curve, so 18% becomes the middle gray. Okay. And visually also, it looks more like the, middle tone. So that's why the camera, even digital cameras, if there is a bright area, if there are several brighter areas, several darker areas in the frame, it will put an exposure, or it automatically detect an exposure so that the entire frame becomes an 18% gray. So this is what happens in case of such an image where the camera matrix metering, if I'm using, it's basically have certain exposure that accounts for 18% gray for the frame. But I don't need 18% gray. I probably need, something like towards the left, or I need, more darker areas in the frame. So I have to compensate that 18% gray rule put by the camera and compensate it negatively to overall take the image towards, more, darker side. So that's why if you understand this 18% gray concept in photography, it will be very easy for you to compensate your exposures. Okay, so you can even visually, after some experience, visually see a particular frame and see the, okay, these are brighter areas, these are darker areas. So probably brighter areas are more than darker areas, and my subject is dark, so I need to compensate in this way or that way. So this comes with experience, but if you know certain bit of basics of how camera sets an exposure, it helps us to override that and compensate that exposure. So this is about exposure. Now, again, I said these are the values. For example, is f6.3 2500 and ISO 4500, and this was actually, the real image I'm saying. It was initially exposed at -1 EV, but then of course it was later corrected digitally also. But the ideal way would be I had to digitally make it -2 stop in order to get such an exposure. Now there's a other situation where I have to positively compensate a particular image, because here this particular gibbon is black, against a relatively white, background. So here an exposure compensation of say +1.3 has helped me in bringing out the details on a black subject. If I let the camera set this exposure, it will again apply that 18% gray rule, and it will make this gibbon darker in order to get the average detail on the background as well. So that's why we have to override it towards the positive side. Now again, there's another example. The background is white, the bird is darker, it is flying against a white or relatively overcast sky. So there's again a positive exposure compensation in order to get some details on the bird. uh, yeah, so this is about exposure compensation. I don't want to go too much into detail because we only don't have much time. uh, Second, coming to composition. Now, once we come to composition, it is basically representations of the elements like, lines, shapes, forms, texture, pattern, and color and space. Now, once I say line, I'm not going to go into detail of each and every one of them. So today I'll mostly be discussing, when I discuss composition, I'll mostly be discussing about the fifth element, which is space, how to arrange space in your, composition or in your frame. The very basic rule, I'm not going to tell you what is rule of thirds. I'm sure most of you are photographers and you will know. Just for the beginners, it is basically if you, arrange your frame by two imaginary horizontal and two imaginary vertical lines, keeping the subject is one in one of the, sections known as rule of thirds. Of course, this is a classic example of rule of thirds, how the bird has been kept as one of the cross sections. Now, there's another thing called perception of direction. If there is a movement happening in the frame, we can always, use that or use the framing to give a sense of direction in your composition. Now, here the bird is flying, and the more space has been, the more space has been kept at the front because it gives a perception of direction. So that's why less space has been kept behind the bird. Now this is what is conventionally done, but there can be other things, there can be exceptions, or there can be other elements playing in to composition where we may not be keeping more space towards the front of a movement. Now, ideally, here both rule of thirds as well as perception of direction is playing its role. How? It's basically, of course, the subject has been kept at one of the cross sections, but then there is more space towards the left, the left side, and that is because the subject itself is looking at the left. It's probably aiming to go. It's probably aiming to go this side, and keeping more space that side gives a perception of direction of the movement, or what is being anticipated by the photographer, or what has happened after the photo has been clipped, or all these kind of things. So rule of third, so sometimes more than one rule, more than one thing can be applied while framing. It's not uncommon to do that. Now, take an example of this image. Now, of course, it looks like the rule of third has been followed, but then the perception of direction is wrong here, apparently. So there's more space towards the, towards behind the bird. So what is the reason of, framing this, this subject like this? Of course, this also has, individual perception will also play its part. It's not like what I have done is correct, or if it would have been done other way, it won't be correct. It's nothing like that. It's always photographer's own perception that, play its role while framing. Now, this is the original image, actually, honestly speaking, honestly showing. This was clicked with a Nikon 400mm 2.8, and this is the maximum reach I had with a 400mm lens. This is an uncropped frame. This also looks okay to me, at least. It's middle frame because I get maximum focusing efficiency at the middle of the frame, not at the corners of the frame. So that's why this image has been shot like this. But I'm not suggesting like you shoot like this and later crop. In certain situations, you have no other option. If I'm shooting with a 400 mm, and that if that is not sufficient to have give me a full frame, or give me a narrow view of the frame, I have to shoot it some way. So in such a situation, I have kept the subject at middle, I have shot like that, and later I have basically cropped it to compose it in a certain way. Now there are several options. First is to keep the subject at the center. It looks pretty okay for me. Follow your typical perception of direction concept and keep the subject at lower third, so that we get a perception of direction. But for me here, for a wildlife photographer, at least when I see my subjects, the most important thing is the eye. If I have an eye contact with the subject, the first priority that I will give in my framing is where the eyes are. So in this case, if you look at the direction of the bird looking at, it is towards its back, or it is towards me, rather to say, if you say. So by placing the subject or more space towards this side, I can show even the bird is flying, it is actually looking towards me. So it's leaving the frame, but is looking towards me. So it's my perception of how I see the subject and how I place it. So it don't probably be wrong to keep it in the middle. Again, here also bird is going away, but it is leaving a trail on the water, and this is what I tried to show, like what the bird has left behind, and that's why there's more space uh, towards behind the bird. Now again, when I talk about keeping the subject as one third of the plane, it is such a in case of such a tight frame, it is probably the eyes that I would like to place at the correct place, correct position. Here, that's why more or less the eyes are at one third of the plane. So that's how it follows rule of third. So I mean, I'm basically talking about the space in the frame, as I said previously. Here also the same thing. In case of tight frames, and when sometimes shoot with tele lens, particularly the prime lens, you have no other option of keeping more space at times. So there you have to decide whether you will keep more space on top of the head, whether you will keep less space. But then in doing so, try to concentrate on the eyes, particularly if those are visible, or particularly if there is a catch light on the eyes, something like this, if there is eye contact. So then your eyes become the primary subject in your frame or in your photograph, and try to place your primary subject the way you want, basically. Now there are three situations. This is the uncropped frame, and these are two possible crops, 0, 1, 2. I had to crop this image because there are a lot of clutters, there are a lot of unwanted elements. If I don't crop, there's another monkey sitting at front, which is actually a distraction in this case. There are some extreme brighter areas on some of the corners which are distraction, because I want this backlight to be illuminating the basically that baby monkey. So I have to crop this image basically. But how I would crop this image? If you can shoot it like this in the field itself, that's the best option. So you get a bigger image, bigger size image. But sometimes it's not possible. It was not possible for me to go further nearer, or I was in fact shooting this with a 500 mm. So I was shooting this with a Nikon 200 500 mm, but this was the maximum reach I had with at 500 mm in. So I had to click like this, but then I decided to crop. Now here again the same principle. The animal is looking at the top, so I probably keep more space. So my preferred composition will be the number 2, where I keep the animal towards one of the sides, so that I can uh, give this perception. Here, this perception is blocked. We have more space here, which is working as a dead space in the sub frame. So I personally would prefer this particular frame. So this is how basically I decide my composition, whether I am shooting them directly in the field or whether I'm cropping them later on my computer. So these are the principles that I follow. So this would be the resulting image basically. Now, sometimes there can be some creative framings which need which not necessarily follow certain rules. They may follow certain rules, but you can always experiment with your images. Sometimes you can, in fact, use some of the obstacles to your advantage. So, for example, this is an image of two otters playing. Now, I had absolutely no way of, absolutely no way of, avoiding this particular subject, which is basically, falling tree trunk. And I was looking underneath that gap to those, otters. Absolutely no way of, avoiding this. So the only way of doing it is not try to, avoid it probably, and use it to your advantage. So it is kind of, it has given me an additional frame to further narrow down the attention of the viewers towards the subject. So basically, I'm using it as a negative space so that I get the attention of the viewers towards my subject. So sometimes you can use such obstacles to your advantage. So it's always being done. So you have to decide that while clicking the picture. Probably you can try my multiple compositions and later select which one you like, if you have the luxury of time, of course. So in wildlife photography, you normally don't have that luxury of time in most of the cases, particularly when there is some action is happening. Here again, does it follow any? The bird is just in the middle, and I had no other option. I had no way of following any rules, and this is almost a full frame image. I haven't cropped it much. And there was a narrow gap through those foliages, and I knew the bird will be fine. I was on a gypsy. In fact, Kalita was next to me, and there was absolutely, I know the bird will be flying through, probably flying through that gap, but that was the only opening I had. There was absolutely no way of, framing it otherwise. And I wanted this shot of hornbill directly from below and flying below the canopy of the tree. So in this case, I basically used a center composition or something like that. And for me, it works. And since it's been published at several places, I think the editors also like the image. Similarly, some of the things are better be composed at the center, because otherwise you will either have a lot of other distracting elements. Yeah, certain frames that can just be creative. And of course, if I ask you now, someone will say that this composition follows the golden triangle or something like that. But while clicking, I was not thinking about global triangle or anything. Something that just interests me at that time, pure as a matter of uh, my perception. I just click at that time. Now coming to equipments. Okay. So when we talk about equipments, we essentially talk about the camera and the lens, but then there are several other accessories that you need to take care of. So we'll basically first be talking about how I decide which camera body to use. Sometimes you have to make the decision while buying the camera, And if you have, say, the luxury of having more than one camera, then we can also decide that while, you know, picking up the camera from your bag, like which camera body I will be using for this particular situation. So in both cases, it's applicable. But if you are, if you have to make that decision, suppose if you want, you know, if you can get only one camera body and you have to make that decision while buying the camera, it's a pretty tough choice, to be frank. uh, but how I order my preferences while, choosing a camera body, whether it is at the time of uh, buying a camera, or whether it is at the time of picking that up from my camera bag, it's pretty much the same. First, it's image quality, you know. Um, Second, as a wildlife photographer, I often need to work, in low light conditions or variable light conditions. Light is the last thing that I can control myself, except for using flash in certain conditions, but which is not very advisable. So how the camera sensor is sensitive towards light, or how I can use, the ISO setting to make the camera more sensitive towards light without losing image quality, makes a lot of difference for me. Now, earlier there was a thing like, crop frame sensors are, full frame sensors are better than crop frame sensors. It is probably still true, but now there are crop frame cameras which are pretty good in terms of their low light performance, like cameras like Nikon D500. They are actually pretty good in terms of their low light performance or high ISO performance, but then they still probably can beat the full frame cameras in certain cases. But there are exceptions, actually. It's not always like that. uh, so that's where the full frame versus the crop frame choice also comes. But then the main thing for me, that I take into consideration while picking up a full frame or a crop frame body is probably that 1.5x cropping factor. Now this is important. The longest lens that I have is a 400 mm. Now, for certain subjects, like if you're shooting birds next to a wetland, 400 mm is not enough. You will get the subject at the middle, like I have shown that, bird swallow subject at a very small part of the frame. So I need to go nearer. But approaching an animal nearer is not always possible in natural conditions. So if I use a crop frame with my 400 mm lens, I get 600 mm. So that's a big advantage. And that saves me another 6 lakh rupees in buying a, you know, uh, 600 mm prime. So in those cases, crop frame is advantage. Of course, then comes the focusing. How many focusing points are there in the camera? Because for wildlife actions and all those things, focusing is of utmost importance. I give a lot of emphasis on how my camera bodies focus. Then for wildlife action, the frame per second is an important factor. But for me, even though most of the cases what we see whenever people do wildlife photography, you will hear the machine guns buzzing like tut, 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 tut. But believe me, I am doing wildlife photography for past 15 years, and now my realization is that probably only in 10% of the occasions that I am shooting, I need a 10 frame per second body. Rest of the 90% occasion, I would emphasize more on image quality. I would emphasize more on high ISO performance, and I would emphasize more on focusing. So those are more important than frame per second for me. Of course, frame per second, a 10 frame per second body would be great to capture actions. Absolutely no doubt about it. And then those 10% of those occasions can give you great shots. But in my order of preferences, it doesn't come at the top. It may vary from person to person, of course, but my uh, order of preference, it doesn't come. Then handling and robustness. being a wildlife photographer, it makes a lot of difference. Robustness plays a lot of difference. My camera has seen dirt probably more than anyone else sitting in the chat room. I can claim that. So I have used and abused my equipments, and I know that reduces the resale value of my cameras if someone is interested in buying my cameras. But that's a fact. It's not like I don't take care of my cameras, but robustness helps a lot, because you have to shoot sometimes under rain. And this is one particular thing why I actually chose Nikon initially, because when I started my photography, I was talking to a lot of experienced people and experienced photographers, and almost everyone said Nikon is probably one of the most robust camera equipments for wildlife photography. And that still holds true for me. I'm not saying this because Nikon is hosting this, but that's a fact. The weather sealing is almost impressive, and that helps a lot. Now, second coming to lenses, of course, the first thing that you think about when you want to buy a lens is its focal length. So whether you will be buying a 40 mm or a 400 mm, whether you will be buying a 50 mm or a 500 mm, would depend on what kind of photography you will be doing. And then comes the zoom lenses, the variable focal length lenses. Uh, the prime lenses or fixed focal length lenses, of course, optically they are better performing, no doubt about it. But sometimes you don't have the luxury of taking 2, 3, 4, 5 lenses. If you can, probably you should be shooting with prime lenses. But when I first bought my serious lens, and I'm still using that a lot, I chose zoom over a prime. I basically bought 200, 400, Nikon 200, 400. That's a pretty expensive. That is as expensive as a prime lens. So price was not the main factor. But for me, that variable focal length of 200 to 400, yet maintaining the optical quality, was the prime, point of consideration. Now, if I have the option of, so if I know, like, I can shoot with only with the 400 mm in, I'll probably still be picking up the 400 mm 2.8, no doubt about it, because that lens is far superior in terms of other things as well. Of course, optically it is superior, speed wise it is superior. It is 2.8, so low light performance under low, is absolutely superb. But then for me, if I'm carrying one lens and shooting everything from large mammals to a small bird with the same lens, then I'll probably prefer a variable focal length. Of course, if I have the luxury, if I can carry, I'll always keep more than one body, more than one lens, and I normally do it. But having a variable focal length lens with good optical quality is the first thing that I choose as a photographer. And of course, the optical quality would matter a lot. Focusing speed, it also depends a lot on the lens. So the amount of speed that you will get on a 400 2.8 will be far better than what you would get on 200 400, no doubt about it. So if you need speed, for example, like shooting flying birds, probably prime lens will be a better choice. And then what is the maximum aperture, whether it is f2.8, f4, maximum aperture is f5.6, that gives you an advantage under low light conditions. And then of course, having vibration reduction is almost essential, particularly when you are doing handheld photography. And in wildlife photography, probably 50% of my occasions I'll be doing handheld photography. Handling and robustness, like as I said earlier, those are very important things. Now there are lenses, for example, the 400 2.8 earlier version, whoever has used, they know that it weighs like a real Canon. I mean, I'm not talking about the Canon company, but Canon, that what you call and say a big gun, it weighs so much. But the new version, which is the FL version, it's probably lighter than my 200-400, and it's amazing. You can use it handheld, and that gives you a great advantage. So if you're choosing between a FL lens and a non-FL lens, and if you have the money, go for an FL lens, for example. It's absolutely great. So these are my considerations. And now, okay, for example, this is one of the situations where I was shooting with a single lens. Because I was walking in the forest floor, I had no other option of, I couldn't probably carry two, cameras, or because I was walking for the whole day searching for the stump-tailed macaques. Now, I was shooting with my 200-400 mm, and this was at the 200 mm end. Consider a situation if I had, consider a situation if I had a 400 mm prime lens, I would have probably got only this much, and that would have been okay, but not what I would have wanted. Because I mean, there's a significance of this photo. It not only shows the animal, the whole body of the animal, it also shows that there are two coat colors of stump-tailed macaques, in a single population, for example. So this is the darker morph, this is the lighter morph. So even biologically speaking, or even subject-wise speaking, my choice of focal length has helped me in showing, certain characters of the subject that I have, photographed. So that's why, for me, 200-400 was a better choice. Now, another situation here, I needed speed, absolute speed in terms of focusing. So, and also, of course, the shutter speed, but shutter speed you can get up to 1/4000 or 1/8000 second in any of the camera bodies. But the focusing efficiency was something. Of course, the camera also contributes to focusing efficiency, but if cannot be compensated by, the lens efficiency of the lens, then it won't. So this is a blazing first bird. Whoever has tried it, there's a bird swallow, they know it's very difficult to focus on the bird while it is flying, because it flies very fast. It's one of the fastest flying birds in the world. So Nikon 400 mm 2.8 was the right, probably, lens of choice. In fact, the day I could get my hands on 400 2.8, the very next morning I did that, I went to a spot that I know of, having these birds, and tried shooting them. So this was the, for example, resulting image. So in this case, I could have probably done it with the 200-400 as well, but not with the same efficiency and the number of good shots that I came back with. The 400 2.8 was far more in number compared to what I probably would have got with my 200-400. So in this case, 400 2.8 was the right choice. Here, this is an image of a golden langur. I was, for example, shooting with Z6 and 400 2.8. Probably some of you have seen my video that I have posted on Facebook few days back, of the same frame, more or less. So that video was also shot with Nikon Z6 and 400 2.8. Now this was the frame I got with 400 2.8. Now, of course, this was my desired frame, but I also wanted to document other aspects of the species. Like, there will be certain frames that I would want of the complete body of the animal, which I couldn't do with 400 2.8. So in such cases, having a second lens and a second body would have helped. And that's what was the case, because I was also carrying a 70-200 mm lens, which was mounted on my D500. And with a second body, I could click the complete animal. So sometimes, if you can carry, or if you have, it is better to have at least two bodies with two lenses having different ranges of focal length. So my normally preferred combinations would be, in one camera I would have a wide angle lens. I use 16 to 35 lens Nikon. So in one camera I would be keeping that. My second combination would be one camera with 70 to 200 so it helps a lot in shooting mammals like this kind of situations. And the third will be a longer lens. It could be 200, 400, and if I get a hand on a prime lens, like it could be 400 500 or 600 or whatever I can have at that moment. So that's why having multiple bodies are useful if you are doing field photography. Yeah, so these are about camera, but then there are other things that you need to take care of. Is camera support. Now camera support is almost as essential as other things like exposures and other things, because many times we keep hearing this complaint. Even in Nikon workshops we hear a lot, like, I have bought this lens, it is so expensive, but not giving me sharp images. Sometimes sharpness is a more of a handling factor than your lens or camera. Probably even with an entry level set of camera you can probably click sharp images. Of course the lens quality determines the overall quality of the image, including sharpness. But sometimes lack of sharpness, it's not only due to the quality of your lens. So in this case, camera support, first thing, of course, how to handle your camera is important. And if you can have camera support as per choice of the occasion, of course, you should always emphasize on using camera supports. Of course, when I select my camera support, it is always choice of the occasion. If I'm, for example, sitting on a gypsy, probably it would be very inconvenient to use a tripod. In those kind of situations, I will probably be using a bean bag or maximum a monopod. But if I'm walking, and if I'm not walking for long, if I have the fitness to carry my tripod, I will probably be carrying a tripod, because tripod is probably the tripod with a good head. Tripod head is probably the best camera support that you can use. And then if I'm walking for long, if I'm carrying heavy equipments, if my fitness, for example, doesn't support carrying me that much weight for long, I have no other additional supporting hands, then I'll probably be using a monopod if I'm walking and searching for my subject. And then you can always use anything. You can use a branch, you can use a tree for your support, you can lie down, keep your camera on something, anything that you can use, you should try to use, other than doing it handheld, as long as it is possible. It is absolutely as important as the quality of your camera and your lens. Yeah, so I try to carry a tripod as much as it is possible. For long lenses, my preferred support is tripod with something called a gimbal head. As you can see in this particular thing, this is a gimbal head. It basically allows easy movement of the long lens while providing support. This is for still photography, okay? I'm not talking about video. Gimbal heads are not very good for video. In fact, some of the photographers also, they use fluid heads instead of gimbal heads nowadays. So it's up to your choice. But I personally prefer a gimbal head when I'm shooting still, and I prefer a fluid head when I'm shooting videos. So if I have the luxury to shift between equipments. So this is more or less it. I think we can open it for discussion now.
Dev Roy is asking, sir, what are the considerations you take into view while planning your wildlife trips? So you can start
Okay.
from answering this.
Yeah, I'll answer that. This is in fact the preparation part is always the best part for it. Is sometimes even more exciting than actual photography trip. Yeah. So if I know what I'm going to shoot, of course I'll select my equipments accordingly. For example, I have like 4 camera bodies. I have, at least 6 lenses. So I'll be, picking up the equipment from those, depending on what would be the terrain, how I will be traveling in the field, whether I'll be walking or whether I'll be, you know, uh, on a vehicle, or whether I'll be having, supporting manpower to, carry things for me in the field. Depending on those, I'll be carrying equipments accordingly. Okay. Uh, yeah, that's how basically I would be preparing. And if, of course, in situation, it depends on seasonality. If I know that there are possibilities of rain, I'll probably be taking rain protection for myself as well as for my equipment, and all those kind of things I'll, take care of. And then, of course, sometimes it is not possible to charge your equipment. So in those kind of situations, I'll make sure that I have, enough camera batteries with me. So all those kind of things. Yeah. So the second question from Mr. Raj is, in which format you shoot most in wildlife photography? It's always in RAW. I don't shoot in any other format. I don't shoot in JPEG. I don't shoot in TIFF. It is always in RAW. And this gives you so much of flexibility that, you don't basically want to shoot in any other format. JPEG is probably a format for reporting photography, where you need to sometimes send images directly from your camera. Now with, say, for example, Nikon Snap Bridge and all, you can, send uh, you know images through web directly from the camera. So in those kind of situations, probably shooting in JPEG, where you don't have the processing, facilities, you can do that. But otherwise, absolutely raw, always raw. So there's no other, I don't have consider as having any other option for me. How much do I, the third question is, how much do you believe in processing your images? It is as essential as shooting them. Now, processing, it depends on what up to what extent of processing you are talking about. The manipulative processing, not much, until unless, suppose, it also depends on where I'm publishing the image and how truthful I need to be towards the viewers of the image. As a wildlife photographer, I try not to manipulate my images much, and I do not manipulate to an extent which, removes the originality or the truth behind the subject or truth about the subject. I won't do such manipulations. But for example, my image is supposed to be published on a calendar, and there is a small twig behind the bird which is a distraction. I'll probably remove the twig through photo, or remove that branch through processing, to make the calendar look better. And if it doesn't, harm the originality, I'm okay with it. And normally, very basic processing like adjusting white balance, adjusting colors a bit without making it looking unnatural, adjusting levels and curves, and all those basic things. Basically, if I'm printing my images, setting black points and all those things are the basic things that I would probably do, not more than that. Then
Next
the
question.
next
I
question
think.
is from Mahesh Devnath. I
Yeah.
want to buy a full frame camera body. So which one I shall pick up, D850 or Z7 for wildlife as well as landscape, as I have D500. Now, in my opinion, both are equally good. But D7, for example, I have a D850 I'm using, and I'm using a Z6. I also have a 500, so if you have a 500, I would say, and in future, if you are interested in videos, Z6, Z7 will probably be a better choice, because Z7 and Z6, they are more suited for videos. In fact, the image which I'm sharing with me carrying the camera, it's a Nikon Z6 mounted on a 400mm 2.8 that I am carrying. So the mirrorless cameras, of course, they're great for photography. And some of the pictures that I have shown today were shot with the mirrorless cameras that I have been using for past 1 year or so. Uh, D850, it's probably the mother of all cameras. Mother of, in the sense, it's one of the best DSLRs available in the market. Uh, its image quality, particularly its dynamic range, is even far superior than cameras more expensive to it, undoubtedly. But when it comes to DSLR, and particularly, focusing, the mirrorless ones are better for videos. Uh, it's not always about image quality. Sometimes the other performances also matter a lot. So if you're interested in videos parallelly in future, in addition to doing stills, as I do, I shoot both, stills and videos. I would probably, since you have a D500, in your condition, I'll probably buy a Z7. In my case, I am using a 850 and a Z6. Primarily for the same reason, I use the Z6 as my second body when I am shooting stills, and use as my first body when I'm shooting videos. And 850, it's always my primary body when I'm shooting stills, and my second body when I'm shooting videos. So it's like that. Yeah.
I am
Okay,
not
we'll take the
interested
next
in
question.
video or something like that.
Then you can pick up 850. Definitely you should pick up 850 then. But you never know.
Okay.
When I was, I released my first wildlife documentary in December 2018, and till 2017 I had absolutely no plans of going into filmmaking. But I was just shooting some videos, and that helped me a lot in later, collecting some of the footages for my documentary. Now, so you never know after 1 year what you might get interested in. So anyway, but if you are absolutely sure about your specific interest in photography, probably 850 is a great choice. I would prefer that in your condition, in your place.
Thank
Okay,
you.
May
shall we
I?
move on
Yeah.
to
Thank you.
next question? So next question is from Sumitra Kashyap. How much research do you do on the animals before you go to photograph them for the first time? Very interesting question.
Yeah. uh, I mean, this is the first thing that I would probably do. Before I think about what equipments I'll be using, I'll probably be thinking about what I'll be shooting. And I would, I would need to know whether those are, I mean, say for example, if I'm interested in golden langurs, the first thing that I will be, thinking about where they are found. Of course, they may be found in 4 or 5 locations. Second question would be where they would be easy to photograph. And when I say easy, in case of animals, how habituated they are to human presence determines sometimes how easy they would be to find and photograph. If the animal is too shy, it won't be easy to find, and even if you find it will probably run away. So I probably won't like to work with such animals. So if I want to shoot, I need to have them in front of my eyes for as long as I want. So that would be another thing. And of course, what interests me towards the subject will be the first lines that I would be reading. Why I am interested in golden langurs? Because it's an endemic species. It is found only in certain very small pockets of Assam and Western Assam and Bhutan. Of course, those kind of things are always there when I'm studying about what I will be clicking. But once I have decided what I will be clicking, so if it is golden langur, then I will be deciding where they can be best found. Second, I'll be by looking at others' photographs or talking to people, I'll be deciding, okay, how near I can get them. Then I'll be deciding about, okay, in those kind of situations, what equipments could be, helpful for me. And then I'll be, learning about the terrain, whether it's a hilly terrain or a flat terrain. And accordingly, probably I will be deciding on my other equipments like camera accessories, camera support system, all those things. Yes, all these things will play its part. It's a good question. In fact, these are the things, because after some time you stop thinking about camera settings, those comes naturally to you. So these are the things actually you will be thinking about once you are more experienced in photography. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take the next question from Alokesh Gogoi. Sir, which is the best wildlife camera from Nikon? Again, same kind of question of equipment.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to keep one camera, if I have to keep one camera for wildlife photography, I'll probably keep the Nikon D500 at this moment. But then since I have the luxury of keeping more than one camera, as I said, I'll probably keep one full frame and one crop frame. It helps a lot. D850 again is another great choice. I'm using D850 a lot now because of course D850 doesn't give me that frame per second advantage. Okay, like it doesn't give me same frame per second as Nikon D500 does. But what D850 does, because its image size is large, for example, it's a 46 point something megapixel camera. So I have the cropping advantage, which is, for example, if I'm shooting with a 400 mm, that helps. If I crop my image to 50%, the size of the image that I'll retain in D850 will be more than D500. So that will be one of the reasons. Second, the image quality, the dynamic range that the D850 produces it's brilliant, it. So all these kind of things will play its part. If you can keep two cameras only for still photography, as I have answered before, I'll probably be choosing D850 and 500. So it depends.
Okay, we'll take the next question from Rahul Chaudhary. I am using D3400. If I use a 200-500 coupled with 3400, what will be the pros and cons? Cons in terms of noise if I use ISO 800 and above, etc.
See, thing is that in case of entry-level cameras or in case of most crop frame cameras, noise will be a factor. But then even in high-end crop frame cameras like D500 or even D7200, you have a better, high ISO performance. So now 200, 400, 500 is a great lens. I have used it, and anyone is probably one of the, Kalita will be able to tell, it's one of the highest selling lenses primarily for wildlife photography. Now, I would suggest you keep on using it. Of course, you have, asked the questions also and given the answers also. So in most of the situations, don't try to probably go beyond ISO 800 or maximum 1600, depending on the situation. But later you can upgrade your body. You can always go for that, so probably you can go for a 7200 or you can go for a 500 later. So it will be a good choice. But 200, 500 is a great choice, and it will produce you great images as long as you, handle it correctly.
Rahul, if you are able to, Rahul, if you are listening to me, one factor as a equipment understanding of my equipment and my experience, when you use a 200-500 lens, the minimum shutter speed at any point of time will be more than 1/500 because of the focal length. And in wild, especially, you are shooting at least 1/800 or 1/1000. At the moment you keep your shutter speed to 1/1000, your requirement of ISO has to be at least ISO 800 or 1000 for per se, or maybe more than that also. The moment you go beyond ISO 1000, ISO 1200 or 1500, your D3400 will start generating noise because of its crop factor. Henceforth, if you are using a wildlife lens and a very high shutter speed, it is recommended you go for a semi-professional body at least. Something like D7500, D8, D500 or above. I'm not trying to promote these brands, these products to you, but this is the practical aspect which you may be facing already in the market, in the field. You're getting noise. That's why you're asking the question, right?
Yes, right. Yeah.
That is
Thank you so much.
Okay. Next question is from Hirok. Hirok has sent a photograph. Need your opinion. Udanda, can you see the image?
Yeah,
Hirok J. Borua has sent the image. You have to download it first on your computer and then see.
Yeah, I'm downloading.
Okay. So yeah. So everyone can see the image. So he needs your review on this image.
Okay, just a second. I think it's a well composed image. If I can, okay, I can look at the exim information also. If you see, this has been but only thing is that, yeah, I mean, your exposure compensation retains the details of the eyes. It is negatively compensated. In my case, probably I would not have compensated that image negatively. I would have just let camera to dissolve, because the background already has some brightness. You have shot it with a 7300 mm, and thing is that you have shot it at 300 mm focal length, and you have used a 1/200 shutter speed, and yet you could retain the details. Means that you have handled your equipment correctly. So that's a good thing, actually. Otherwise, the thumb rule would say that if you are shooting with a 300 mm, and that too with a crop frame camera, which actually effectively produce 1/450 mm, you at least shoot with 1/400 or something. But here with 1/200, you have retained the details without any motion blur or any camera shake apparently appearing in the image. It's good. The placement of the subject, I would say, it is good in terms of it not only follows rule of thirds, as I was saying, it also takes into account the perception of direction towards which side the bird is moving. So I would say in overall, this will be a very balanced image.
Thank you.
We'll take the next question from Sumitra Kashyap again. Do you know them intimately first, or do you just do it? Does it depend on the animal?
It always depends on the animal. I don't know if I know any animal intimately. So yeah, it depends on the situation, I guess. If I can spend more time with the subject, with the animal, I would probably observe more. Initially, I will probably always observe more until unless it's an extremely rare animal. I know I may not be getting it again, so I'll probably shoot and then observe. But if I know I can see that animal, I'll observe more, and that's why I always try to keep a pair of binoculars also with me in order to observe it properly. Yeah.
So another question from Palash Nath. Thanks for the presentation. I have noticed that in most of the photographs shown today, you have used matrix metering. Do you also use spot metering, especially in the context of built-in function?
No. This bird in flight, not built in
flight. Okay.
Yeah.
Bird in flight.
Yeah.
Do you use spot metering, especially in context of birding flight, right?
Yeah, right. So thing is that it's a very good question. In fact, now it's a very important question I would like to address. Yes, in 90% of my occasions, I probably would use matrix metering. And in fact, when I'm keeping my camera next to me in wildlife photography, see, in wildlife photography, things are uncertain. You don't know what situation you will be in the next moment, what kind of frame you will be getting. So keeping it in matrix metering and using the exposure compensation button is a faster way of handling things than keeping it in spot and try to keep that spot on the subject. For example, in case of birds in flight, I don't know in how many occasions I'll be able to keep the spot on the bird, because the spot on the bird may not be the composition that I want. The center point, I may not be willing to shoot the bird by keeping it at the middle. So if I'm not keeping the subject in the middle, the spot photograph metering won't work. So the best, why I prefer matrix metering, of course, in addition to the fact that it gives an overall frame. So what I keep it in matrix metering. I try to evaluate the brightness, darkness of the frame myself, and I compensate positively and negatively, because that is something that I can do without looking at the camera, or without taking the camera off my eyes. Because exposure compensation, I can just keep the camera and use these two fingers to compensate. So yeah, but if I have the luxury of time, and if the subject is patient enough, so for example, I'm shooting a rhino standing next to me and it won't probably fly away, I'll probably use spot metering as well. There's no, spot metering of course will give you good exposure in those kind of situations. But since wildlife photography, their chances of unexpected things happening is more, I prefer matrix metering.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
This is about the teleconverters. I have a D500, which is, and I mount my 200 500 with the D500, and I have a 750 also. So if I was just wondering, do I need to use a teleconverter for more reach, or in D500 and also in 750 there's that inbuilt crop facility? So which one is better actually? Because I have gone through a lot of review where it says that using an external teleconverter actually lowers the image quality. So that is one thing that I wanted to know from you. Thank you.
First thing, using the inbuilt crop factor is the same as cropping the image later. So using the inbuilt crop, it's a digital crop basically that your camera does. There's no point using it. I have absolutely not used it for even one of my images in my 15 years of photography experience. That's the honest opinion. There may be certain advantages. Okay, someone might say if you're shooting with a 850, and if you don't want your entire frame, why to not save some space and shoot it in crop frame mode, or sorry, that thing mode, digital zoom mode. All those things are okay, but it makes no difference. You are not getting the reach, you are just cropping the image inside. Second, if you said you are using D500 and 200 500, right?
Yes, yeah.
Then in ideal situation, I won't keep my teleconverter on. See, no matter how good quality teleconverters are, they will always reduce some amount of light passing through the sensor. So you can probably keep a 1.4 TC. For example, I just have a 1.4 TC right next to me. You can probably keep it at 1.4 TC. I use it when I need it, but it's not like I will always put it in between my lens and the camera. With 200 500, 1.4 TC works great. You can try it definitely, but I don't recommend using it. Anyway, with DFD 500 and 200 500 at the 500 mm main, you are getting 750 mm. Handholding that and shooting itself. So I think beyond 750 mm, what you should be developing is not your focal length, but how you reach your subject nearer. So those skills are more important probably. So normal situation, I won't recommend keeping it. In exceptional situations, you can always put it on.
Okay. Thank you so much.
We'll take the next question from Mahananda Borgohain. I have a D7500 and I am planning for a 200 to 500 lens. And will it be good combination for wildlife? He's asking a question.
It's probably the best combination at this range. No doubt, we should go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Next question from Neeraj Bora. Sir, basically I am doing my wildlife photography with an entry-level Canon with just 55 to 250 mm. So what kind of frames will you suggest me to click with such nursery equipment?
See, it's not always necessary that you keep your subject tight in the frame. Sometimes an animal and its environment is more appealing than having tight portrait kind of frames for the particular animal. So, and even with a 250 mm, actually in certain cases you will get closer frames, like if you're shooting a rhino or an elephant, which are bigger and you can get them nearer, you can always shoot. But otherwise, work more on your composition and try to show more of the environment, try to show more of the habitat, and you can still have great images, I would say.
Okay, as we are running short of time, we'll now hurry up with the next question from Dev Roy. I want to upgrade my body to a full frame body. How much you recommend Z6 with 200-500 lens?
It's a great combination. And Z6, as I said, you will also have the advantage of shooting great videos. You know, Z6 gives absolutely great videos. You can definitely go for it. Yeah, with 200, 500, I have used it. It works great, absolutely great. And with the new, firmware updates, you have all this animal eye detection and all those things. Those stuff works great. You should definitely try it.
Next question from Nayanjoti Das. Udanda, thanks for this beautiful session and also thanks to Nikon. What should be the autofocus mode and other related settings during shooting of a bird in flight? Because most of the time we miss focus.
Yeah. So I think you can try the group area focus and all those things, and try back button, try shooting in AFC continuous mode, and try dynamic area or group area settings. So dynamic area autofocus, it works great. So you can keep, like, I sometimes, for example, I'm shooting bird in flight, and if the subject is relatively clutter free, like I'm shooting against sky and all, or against plain water bodies, like for example the bird that I have shown, that burn swallow, that was like 20, I have used basically the 25 point mode, 25 point dynamic area mode, and with AFC it works great.
So we'll take the next question from Sumitra. How do you approach a new location that you have shot at before? Do you spend time before shooting? So I think he has already more or less covered this.
Yeah, I have covered that, yes.
So we'll take up the next question again from Praveen Kumar. What things excite you to do wildlife photography? As I am into fashion, I've never done wildlife or something, but pictures from wildlife tempt me a lot. So my point is there any way to build strong interest in wildlife?
What excites you for fashion photography? So it's probably the same thing that excites me. It's a subject. I'm interested in wildlife. So that's the first
I
thing.
think
Yeah.
I would like to add to Praveen. Praveen, see, if you
Yeah.
like fashion, there is no harm in it. You go
Yeah,
for
yeah, of
fashion.
course.
There is no compulsion that you have to do wildlife
Yeah, yeah.
just because
No,
someone else is doing it.
yeah, see, no, thing is that the fact that probably you are attending this workshop is one of the reason would be that you like wildlife, or you
He's
something.
interested somewhere.
Yeah, he is interested. So there's no, nothing wrong pursuing two different genres of photography. I'm probably almost 99% a wildlife photography person, primarily because I'm more interested in wildlife. Cut the photography part away. I'm more interested in wildlife. I'm as interested in wildlife without a camera as with a camera. I can spend equal amount of time with my binocular without having a camera, as much time as I can spend, with wildlife with a camera. So it's the first thing, that you have to develop is the interest and knowledge for the subject, irrespective of your genre.
Okay, next question from Anubhav again. Sir, please let me know the D7500, will it be good for other type of photography except wildlife? Or is it only for wildlife? He's asking.
I don't think so. I mean, I won't be able to tell you about other types of photography, but because I have hardly done it. But of course, except for clicking pictures of my kids, I, I haven't done much
So I would
photography.
like to
Yeah,
add
please,
to this
please.
because he's asking a generic question.
Yeah.
Anubhav, since D7500 firstly is a new camera model, it is already ready for video and still both. All the newer models of camera manufactured by all brands are video ready by default. So it is a 4K already slow motion inbuilt. It has slow motion inbuilt, time lapse is there, interval timing is there. So I think your question is very generic, and this camera can be used in all kinds of photography. There is no brand which is making camera particularly for wildlife. Although D500 and cameras like D5, those are not made for high action photography. For
Yeah.
example, sports,
Yeah.
wildlife, and journalistic kind of photography. But D7500 will suffice to every kind of photography. If you're sticking to video and still both. But if you're doing only video, then I would like to suggest Z6 or maybe
Yeah.
Z50, the newer model. The Z50 is also new mirrorless model, crop sensor model. So, okay, the next question from Himadri Bhuya.
Hmm.
He has given me a private message, but I will. Uh,
Yeah, I also, no,
like to
Himadri also has a
generic question. Yes, yes. Thanks
Yeah.
for this presentation, which will help up clear up a lot of things I practice. If practice, I want to know the importance of wide images, not necessarily shot with a wide angle in wildlife photography and conservation.
It's very important. It's very important. And I mean, someone was asking, like, he has a 55 to 50 mm lens, what images he can shot. So the wildlife in its environment, or any animal in its environment, in its habitat, is very important. And you can have a conservation perspective until and unless you are shooting an animal close up. Even in fact, I remember one of Himadri's images, a macaque or something with a polythene on its top, polythene covering its head. So these kind of images gives them matches. And if you want to show the importance of the habitat, if you want to show the conservation context, wide images are probably, as important as the close-ups. Close-ups lets the animal or beauty of the animal or particular specific things about the animal, lets the viewer appreciate more of those things. But when it comes to the context of existence of the subject or existence of the animal, the wider images always, make a better appeal, I guess.
So next question, or vote of thanks only. Neeraj Vora has asked a very question again. Please discuss the wildlife photography ethics. I think it's
Yeah.
important as a photographer also. We see a
Yeah.
lot of unethical practices going on.
Yeah.
So I think Udayan, you can throw some light.
Right, sure. In fact, see, as I said, the first thing that should interest someone when they are picking up wildlife photography as their genre is their interest for wildlife, their love for wildlife. And when I say interest for wildlife, it should not be a destructive interest for your subject. So, I mean, the motto behind, using photography as a medium should be to spread the message of conservation. And if you are getting the image itself unethically or by using means that jeopardizes the existence of the animal, that puts the animal under some kind of threat, then definitely it cannot be considered as an ethical approach. Now again, all sorts of, even I'm doing wildlife photography from a gypsy, I am probably exerting some sort of pressure on that particular animal. So it is never 100% non-invasive, never 100%, non-disturbing. There's always some degree of disturbance when, a shy animal finds you 10 meter apart or, 50 meter apart. So you have to make a balance out of it, I'd say, and not do things that directly jeopardizes the survival of that animal. Say for example, if two birds are, say trying to mate, some birds are like, laying eggs, those kind of situation, if you climb onto the top of the image just to get a wide angle shot of the bird's nest with his bird, it's probably invasive. Those kind of things you have to avoid. There are certain, issues of call playbacks when you want to get, bird close to you. So depending on how you are doing it, or whether you should be doing it or not, those kind of things have to be taken into consideration. So a lot of things. So trying to be as less invasive as possible is probably the, the best approach. And that's why probably you should be using longer lenses more than the wider lenses when it comes to wildlife as a subject. I haven't done too much of, wide angle photography in wildlife, and I probably won't do it for, subjects that can, harm by my presence nearer to them. Yeah.
So the next question, we are almost out of questions now.
Yeah.
Last question is from Onen.
Just a minute. Udayanda?
Yeah, sure.
Sasankada, you have to wait. You have to wait till the last question, please, or you can type. Okay, just a second.
No, I ask him to just add one thing of the last question, whether flash can be used or not.
Sorry?
Flash আমি use কৰিব পাৰো নে নোৱাৰো, whether flash can be used during wildlife photography or not.
See, it always can be used, but depends on your subject. Again, So depending on how shy your animal is, how sensitive the subject is, it will depend. For example, in macro photography, if I'm shooting an insect, I will probably be using flash all the time. But if I'm shooting a very sensitive animal, and see, when you use a flash, the first thing that happens, particularly for animals which move in low light, your flash will blind them for a few seconds. Now, those few seconds are very critical for it, for its maybe very critical for its survival. But thing is that you can also see it from other angle. Like for example, they see lightning in nature all the time. So probably some animal may not get scared by your flash. It's not like you are always scaring them. They may not get scared. Some animals may get scared. If they can relate the flash to your presence, then probably they will get scared. But if they cannot relate the flash to human presence and they just take it as a lightning, they may not get scared. But even if they take it as lightning and it's not related to your presence, still there will be few seconds of, you know, temporary blindness that can occur. So you have to see whether those few seconds would be critical for its survival. If you think it is not, you can try, but it should not be trying on all animals. Sometimes if you think documenting that subject is important, not just for your collection, but, you know, say for example, you are, you know, preparing, see, I'm also a wildlife biologist. As a wildlife biologist, I, you know, survey places, I prepare inventory of species, all those kind of things. I've done it a lot. We have reported, you know, new species to India through photography work. So those kind of things we have done. And in certain cases, using a flash was absolutely essential. But would I do that all the time? Probably no. Yeah.
Okay, the last and the final question from Onan. How do you tell a story by your photograph or by your image?
I think this kind of questions will take a lot of time to answer. Uh, it depends, you know, of course, photographs means there's always a story behind it. So how do I tell? It would depend on, you know, what I want to tell, what what is available to me to photograph at that moment, whether I can use a single image or more than one image to tell that story. Those kind of things will also matter. So there will be a lot of things. So storytelling is, of course, it's altogether would be a new subject, and that we can probably, you know, discuss sometimes later, how to tell stories through your images. Yeah.
Nayan's question is same, which you have already covered. Use of flash. Lot of best wildlife images are used through flash. What is your suggestion using flash during wildlife? I think we have already
I
covered
think
it
I've answered it.
more or less.
Yes.
So Mahesh Devnath question, any macro photography workshop planning in month? This will take up separately.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are now closing the session. I think we have got, thanks to Zoom also, they have given us a lot of time.
Yeah.
They've given us double the time. So thank you so much for joining.
Of course. Yeah.
So I will share the screen of our Nikon group.
Yeah.
So here also people can post images. If you can see, you can take a screenshot maybe. You can join this group and you can put up your questions or images. And Udayan is also there as a mentor, and we have other mentors also here from Nikon. So close to 6-7 mentors are here. You can please join this group and then you can keep in touch in future.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Udanda, for your precious time. And it has been a great day. Thank you.
You're welcome.